Hey students, we're so glad that you're back in small group, and we wanted to start this year by talking about something that every single one of us has experienced before. That's change. And you have experienced change in many ways throughout your life, and sometimes change is good, sometimes it's bad, and sometimes it's just different. But as you headed into school these last couple of weeks, you've probably noticed some significant changes. Maybe for you, you're at a new school, maybe you have a new schedule, and finding ways to interact with old friends is different, and you maybe have to make new friends. Or maybe you're on a new team and just your routine has changed significantly. And so today we wanted to talk about this thing that every person has to deal with throughout their life. And for some people and for some of us, there are times in our life where change is significant. And it's not as small as a schedule change or a change in school, but it's something massive. Maybe it's a loss of a family member. Maybe it's something happening at home. But regardless, students, whatever change you experience, I want you to know this: you are not alone, and also God has something for each of us to hold on to as we walk through seasons of change. And so the first thing, students, I wanted you to see is that centuries before the time of Jesus, God made a promise to his people. And I wanted to read this promise to you, and here's what God said as his people were in the middle of some significant change. Here's what he said. He said, "Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you." And then he said, "He will not leave you or forsake you." Now, after God made this promise, hundreds of years went by before Jesus showed up. And the time immediately following Jesus, in the time of the early church, there was lots of change happening, and some of it was massive. Some of these early followers of Jesus were being persecuted for their faith, and just their lives were being turned upside down. And in the midst of all that chaos, they were looking at these promises that God had made hundreds of years before, thinking, do those still apply to us today? I mean, how much had changed in hundreds of years? The way that they dressed changed. The way that they worshiped God changed. The entire world had changed. And so they're looking at these promises thinking, does this still apply to me today? And so I wanted to read something to you, and this is another truth, and this is right in the time of the early church that the writer of Hebrews had to say to us, and this is a promise I want you to see. This is what he said. He said, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. And so students, what I want you to see is that God does not change. And students, I want to encourage you with that today, as maybe you walked back into school and everything is different, or maybe you're seeing change coming, but I want you to know this one truth, students, that God does not change. And as you run to God's word and you read the promises that he made thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, I want you to know that those promises still apply to you today just the same, because God does not change, even though your circumstances may. And I know this can be very hard in the midst of change, in the midst of a crazy season, in the middle of a storm. Life gets crazy. But students, I want you to know that in the middle of those things, one thing that can help you be reminded of this is just to stay focused on these truths. And every time I think about this, I'm reminded of this really silly video that I saw years ago. And it's this video of a chicken, and stick with me. But here's what happens in the video. I didn't know this, but if you move a chicken around, their head stays in the exact same place. It's the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. But here's what that reminds me of, students, that in the middle of change, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of a storm even, it helps if we keep our focus on what matters and what's important, and that's the promises that God has already made to you. And so how can you do that, students? Well, here's one thing I want to challenge you to do. I want you to take some time tonight when you go home, before you go to bed, and just to think about the ways in which God has come through for you. Maybe there was something you needed him to come through for you, or just something to provide for you, and he did. And it helps us to remember and be reminded of, God has come through for me before, and God has made promises to me that he's kept. And so students, I want you to take some time in the next couple of days to just, maybe you need to write those down, maybe you need to just be reminded of them, and then somewhere in your routine, whether that's in your bathroom mirror, that's in your locker, that's just on an index card that you put in your car, I want you to write this one simple truth. Life changes, but God doesn't. And I want you to write that somewhere that you'll see it daily. Because listen, a month from now, months from now, year from now, Life can look very different, but the one thing that remains the same and a constant is God, His promises, and His character. And what would it do, students, if every day before you jumped into school, jumped into the craziness, you were reminded of that no matter what happens today, God remains the same. And I think that would help each and every one of us walk through life confidently, regardless of what happens.